Here we go. All right, we're live on the God is Awesome podcast. As always, I'm Chase. I'm here with Bill Whitt, Pastor Bill Whitt, pastor of Worship and Media, associate pastor here at the Sunlight Central Campus. Amazing man, one of my friends. I'm so thankful that I get to be talking to you today, Bill. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely. It's an honor to be on your show. And like you always say, just to share your testimony is a really interesting thing to do, to see God's activity in your life. So glad to do it. I don't know if my life's very interesting or not, but hey, God's in everybody's story, right?
Oh, it's interesting. Trust me, it is interesting. I know some of it, and I can tell you firsthand. Stay till the end because it's great. And you are one of the most interesting people that I know. Seriously, I'm not even making that up.
Wow, thank you.
So this is, your middle name is Steele. Your second middle name.
Yes, and I have two middle names. The other is Roberts. So if you put William and Roberts together, you get Billy Bob, which is an ironic twist given I'm from West Virginia.
I feel like it's very apropos.
Yeah, that too.
Well, thanks so much. Like you said, we get this opportunity to share our testimony on the God is Awesome podcast. Tell me a little bit about, you said you were from West Virginia. Tell me a little bit about what it was like growing up in West Virginia and tell a little bit about how the story began. Generally with a testimony, for those of you that are watching, we usually talk about the before and then a change and then an after. So tell me a little bit about the before in your story.
Yeah, so I grew up with my parents. I was an only child. And I guess a lot of my life has been achievement based. Not that my parents put that weight on me, but they modeled that for me. They were excellent parents. Mom was valedictorian of her high school, and I just kind of took that upon myself as a goal. Well, that's what I'm going to do too, and I did. And had a 4.0 all the way through to my latest degree, and then Dr. Wyma gave me an A minus.
You blew it.
Anyways, so 3.97 on the MDiv. Anyway, so there's been this strand of achievement based, trying really hard to do well to earn my place in the world ever since I was little. Probably wasn't the most. I know this is hard to believe now, but I wasn't the most good-looking person or socially adept person, or even well-adjusted person. As an only child, I had a very active imagination. I had, I don't know, I just wasn't all that great at social situations. And so that probably followed me all the way through elementary school, middle school, high school, college. And it wasn't until late that I kind of bloomed into being a more outgoing, I don't know, a fun person. I don't want to say I'm fun now.
You hesitate on that. You're fun.
Yeah, thank you. But yeah, so that was my raising in a nutshell. Nice country-ish type West Virginia, friendly, safe neighborhood, feeling well supported, feeling like doing well was important. Was a member.
Was it a Christian home? You were about to say that.
Yeah, was a member of both my parents are a member of Brushfork Baptist Church. It was a Southern Baptist church, and so we would go every Sunday morning, most Sunday nights, most Wednesday nights. It was your typical Bible Belt upbringing, gospel-centered preaching, which is great, but it's also gospel-centered. That was the gospel-centered preaching that was to the exclusion of, how shall we say, almost like the rest of theology. A lot flows out of the gospel. A lot flows into and out of the gospel. And at that church, we really never got past just, hey, you might die tomorrow. Do you know Jesus? That was kind of every single Sunday was drilled into our heads. You might not make it home the roads today. Be ready, be ready, be ready. And I'm sure maybe a lot of people watching had a similar upbringing. And Jess did too. Southern Baptist and also Pentecostal-ish kind of stuff. So for both of us, there's a lot of fear involved with religion. For me, I had that achievement orientation, but I also had that fear orientation of you know, this is your primary motive to know Jesus because you could die and you don't want to go to hell. And not that that's not biblical, that is biblical, but there's a lot more than that.
Right.
Um, so that was my upbringing. And like I say, I accepted Jesus at a pretty young age. I think I was in middle school, probably seventh grade when I was baptized.
Cool.
And it was before that that I kind of really understood the gospel and personalized it for myself at a vacation Bible school. And this is why I'm such a big fan of VBS ministries today, because it's just like you get all that time with kids speaking their language, and it makes sense. And so, as part of a VBS ministry, it made sense to me. I was a sinner, and I needed, the death of Jesus to pay for my sins. And I accepted Jesus and was baptized. And then after that, it's kind of flatline because nothing against that church. I don't want to speak bad about anything, but uh, maturity wise, it was just like, where do I go from here? Well, I don't know. And I had all these questions, especially as I got into high school, and then especially as I got into college. People began asking me difficult things about the Bible. Well, what about this? And what about this? And well, how can you possibly believe this? And I didn't have the good answers. And I asked people in my church, and they were struggling to give me answers that made sense too.
Sure, that's tough.
And it made almost like a little mini crisis of faith. Not that it could have pulled me away from the faith, but it really, um, again, as the smart kid, as the achievement oriented kid, as the academic kid, I was like, this should make sense. And if they're not able to tell me how this makes sense, then that's a problem.
Wow. So you found yourself like because you could master everything well, and you were uh, even trying and trying to be the best, right? Trying to succeed, and you still do. You hold your intelligence to a very high standard. You do a lot of research. I really admire that and respect that about you. But that boy at that time is trying to deal with the fact that there's some things that don't pan out. Can you tell me a little bit? And I wouldn't maybe do this except for I know you. Can you tell me what some of those questions are that you struggle with that other people listening might struggle with?
Yeah, well, I'm trying to think. It was mainly how the different pieces of the Bible fit together,
Oh,
and
okay.
apparent contradictions. So it was like death by a thousand paper cuts back then. It wasn't any one big thing that it's like, wow, but it was like, hey, well, this verse says this, but over in the other version of this event in Chronicles, it says this. Now, what's the deal? And even things like women's ordination, and that's something that probably we don't want to get into, but it's one of those things where, as a high schooler, a lot of my friends are saying women should be pastors, and my church believed women shouldn't be pastors. When I asked, the answer was kind of like,
You know
you
what?
know, yeah. So it's just various topics like that. But maybe the overarching one is one that you can relate to really well because it intersects with your story. And that's how the Old Testament and the New Testament fit together. And why is God so angry in the Old Testament, and why is God so merciful in the New Testament? And interestingly enough, man, that question can drive people mad. It can drive people away from the faith. I just saw on Instagram the lead singer of Hawk Nelson,
I saw that.
and it was that. I mean, as I read every word he wrote, and that was a big part of it. Was like he couldn't make heads or tails of that. And so you can just picture me as a college student trying to find logic and faith and not finding good answers there. Now, in God's providence, He led me to a Presbyterian church because there was a girl I liked there, but also just it was the happening church. In fact, all my friends kind of went to that church. All my best friends went to that church, so they invited me to a youth conference, and I went and just started plugging in more and more. And then when I became a college student, I went to college for 1 year in my hometown, a small college. So I attended this college Bible study. It reminds me a lot of Redeem and what Corey's doing now, what Aaron does. Like college leaders are just like that. They'll stay up all night with you.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. I mean, there was a small group of us guys who had questions about life, the same type of questions we've been talking about. And he would just stay at we would be 3 a.m., just talking about life, talking about the Bible, talking about how it all fits together. talking about difficult things like how could the Bible say God chooses people? That whole predestination thing, wrestled my way through all of those aspects of theology in the course of that, and it really changed my life because for the first time I could really hold the Bible in my hand and be like, this makes sense. Like first page to last page. I don't have to explain away anything. I don't have to say like, well, that was a long time ago. I don't have to explain away stuff in there like some people do. But
That's
I can say, hey, this all is the same message, and some parts are more difficult to understand than others, but there is a way to understand it. And I became really passionate about that because I wanted other people to know, like, hey, you don't have to explain away difficult parts of the Bible. You don't have to make excuses for what it says about God or what it says about anything. Um, and that kind of put me on my course to wanting to teach and wanting to preach. And
just
yeah,
just pause there for a second because I feel like there's two things that I think we can't keep going without talking about. Number one, um, this idea of the fact that the Bible is one story. Growing up, people told me a lot that we don't have to talk about the Old Testament anymore because it's the New Testament that we focus on. But now you're saying something different from them, and you're saying that the Bible is one story. When you felt that for the first time, when you got that, what was the outcome of that for people that are maybe struggling with that same question?
yeah, like I say, it's just that for me, it was that you don't have to turn off your brain to be a Christian, which is really important to me as a intellectual person in this world. I don't want to believe things that are not true. I don't think anybody does.
Well,
And
well,
so,
like you didn't turn your brain off. How do you justify the Old Testament and the New? I'm really asking the question,
mhm.
asking you to answer it for people that might struggle. How does the New Testament and the Old Testament work together?
Yeah, well, one of the best things I've ever done is read through the Bible cover to cover. And I've done it probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 times in my life so far. When I was in college, I did it including the study notes. And that was quite, I mean, this is a thick Bible. And doing so helped me to understand I think the unlocking that is understanding the genres. So each grouping of books in the Old Testament, you have to read in a certain way. And you have to understand what they meant to the original audience, how they are read by the original audience, and then have to see them in light of the New Testament. And use a book like Hebrews to look back and interpret that for you, and of course, Paul's writings. So, for instance, Leviticus is one of the most obtuse books to a lot of folks. But once you see how Christ fulfilled all the rituals, all of the furniture, all of the priesthood, every aspect of the stuff in that book, especially the sacrifices, it makes your understanding of the character of God all the more rich. So when you see Christ fulfill that, then you understand it even better.
That,
Um,
that's
yeah.
awesome. For me, it was actually the Ark of the Covenant is my
Mm.
jam. You're talking about all that. In the Old Testament, for me, when I realized this idea that there was God and then a cover and then
Mm.
everything that represented sin, and it's called Jesus the mercy seat or the cover, the thing that connects God, brings us back together, reconciles that relationship. That for me, when I saw that, oh my gosh, the whole thing points to Jesus. For me, it changed everything. Like
Yeah.
you said, it made me think, man, maybe I don't have to shut off my brain. You
Hmm.
know? Uh,
Yeah, that was really important to me, like I was saying, because nobody wants to just turn off their mind and believe a fairy tale. And yet, I think a lot of people think that about Christianity. They misread what faith is, and they just say, well,
hmm,
you got to have faith to bridge that gap between real and unreal. Sort of like the Disney definition of faith. If you just believe strong enough,
wow.
it doesn't matter what you believe in, but if you just believe, then good things will happen to you. And I believe faith is trust. I think that's a more biblical uh, word to put around what faith is. And so, based on what you know is true, living your life trusting and obeying. I don't know how to. It's really hard to put words around it all of a sudden, but
Yeah.
the deepest form of belief, really trusting in what you know is true.
Well, it's interesting because I'm obsessed with Genesis, right? And so right away in the beginning, what ends up happening is Eve's lack of trust. She doesn't
Hmm.
have trust in God. She has to trust in herself. What's interesting about that is through the whole time, when we don't trust God, through the whole Bible, it's stories of people that when they don't trust God, they trust themselves or they trust their own abilities. And so what ends up happening is you substitute yourself for God. And so like it's just really interesting. So when you say trust as faith, that makes total sense to me. I think that's great.
Yeah, and I think there's this rhythm in the Christian life, just as with any other relationship. When you trust somebody, you are almost testing them. Are they going to be trustworthy? And if they're not, you trust them less, you know. But with God, you trust Him and you find He is trustworthy and you place more faith in Him and you see He's faithful. And that's the walk of the Christian life is trusting God more and more and finding He's more and more worthy of that trust.
Wow.
And so, yeah, as a ministry leader, you know, I think a great goal for us is to enable people to deepen their trust in Jesus, to deepen their relationship with Jesus. And that happens by giving them more opportunities to, you know, follow Him in ways that require them to trust Him.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and my life's been full of plenty of opportunities like that, even coming to Florida, you know. So I was the hometown kid, only child. People
That
never thought I would leave my town because a lot of people don't leave that town. It's a small town, you know, and I was shy, and it would take an act of God to make me leave, but there was an act of God, so here I am in Florida, and it's really interesting, you know. This job at Sunlight came searching me out. I'd never heard of Sunlight. I'd never heard of the CRC. I'd never heard of Scott Vanderplug. But one day, just got a call because a mutual friend that I didn't even know was a mutual friend um, linked us up, and I don't know. Long story short, you know, God made the way. The real estate market was terrible at the time, but we put our home on the market, and somebody snapped it up right away
wow.
at a great price. We moved down here. Uh, Paul Scott was giving me a tour of the neighborhood. He's like, "Hey, there's a house down the street that's the same floor plan as mine, and it's a foreclosure." And I wrote down the number, and I said, "I think this is the house." And
And that's this house that we're
that's this house, yeah.
that's awesome.
And I called the real estate agents. They wouldn't tell me anything. They're like, "We can't tell you when it's going to hit the market. We can't tell you the price or anything. Just keep on hitting refresh, you know." And anyway, I got Jen Fleshner on the job like an attack dog, and she was on vacation when the house finally hit the market, and she on vacation learned an entire new system to make an electronic offer and do all this contractual work. So it was a foreclosure, and long story short, here we are.
That's awesome.
God's provided. It's like the wind has been at our back, you know, to get here and to fit in. I like to tell people, and I haven't said this in a while. I don't know if I've ever told you, but during that transition period, when I think Scott flew me to Florida twice, and almost from the very first time, Sunlight felt more like home than home did,
Wow.
and I found myself missing the folks there. It was really odd. People talk about the family feeling that Sunlight gives, and I experienced that from right away. You know,
What do you think that was? Like,
you know, my man, Scott introduced me to so many awesome people when I flew down for the interview. The group that was doing the church plant, known as Word of the Cross at the time, you know, and I was just blown away that these guys had so much fire for Jesus, but it was not empty emotionalism. They loved theology, and that's right where I was, you
yeah.
know. So to see the combination of theology and not cold like intellectual steel debate, but to see theology bloom into this love for Jesus was really, really like profound. And then just everybody else just welcomes you with an open arm, and they're like so happy to know you. And yeah, it's really cool.
For people that are not part of Sunlight, that are watching, uh, what kind of things like are important to make someone feel welcome rather than just welcome? I don't know how that. I don't know if that makes sense, but like I guess here we talk about the difference between welcome and warm. Uh,
Mhm.
what are your thoughts on that?
You know, I've been to churches, thankfully not many, just visiting, that are not warm to visitors, and I don't understand how you cannot be. I think it is hard is selfishness because they are comfortable. It's a multi generational. This has always been our church. There's a little too much ownership of that kind of church, maybe. Like this is the way we like to do things, and if somebody else comes in, they may mess that up. Um, but Sunlight has never been like that. You know, Sunlight is more like we are an island in an ocean of people that don't know Jesus, and they just need to, you know, and we are happy whenever God brings them our way. And I think over all the years I've been here, we've never struggled to have visitors visit. I mean, God just constantly brings folks in, and you know, Scott greets them with the gospel every week, and we greet them with open arms and hopefully acceptance every week. And that's how we got where we are now. It's an amazing story to look back on how far Sunlight has come in so short a time. You know.
Yeah, thank you for being a part of and playing a big role in that as well. In your own personal testimony, you're here at Florida. You accept the call as associate pastor, right? Uh,
Right.
because you felt at home. What kind of things has uh, after you got there? What happened next in your journey? What kind of things did God do once you were in Florida?
Yeah. Well, immediately I got plugged into what we called the Timothy School, which offered seminary level classes at a very low cost, you know, subsidized by our denomination and others. And so I was learning about, you know, theology and getting seminary credit. And then later on was able to transfer that into a full uh, ministry degree, MDiv degree, which I finally wrapped up last year after
Congratulations.
8 years of slugging through it. It's tough to be a full time employee and a full time grad student, but wrapped that up, and so that was one thing. And you know, a parallel journey we haven't even talked about yet is musical.
I was hoping to
So
bring it up.
uh, you know, growing up, I didn't sing a lot. The church was small. The church sang Southern gospel stuff that a banjo would fit in well with. We didn't have a banjo, but it would have been appropriate. And I don't know how to describe it other than it was. It's some people's thing, but it wasn't my thing, and I never connected with the music. Uh, it's really interesting. I don't know how deep to get into this, but every denomination has, and every Christian movement has something they focus on in their music.
Okay.
And for that era of Southern Baptists, it was all the when the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. In the great by and by, it's all like this earth is not good, and I just want to get to heaven. And I found that really interesting. Like, and the sermons were similar too. And I wanted to live in God's world and like do good things here, and you know, be a witness for Him and transform it and bring the kingdom. And all we're doing is singing about when the roll is called up yonder. And um,
Hmm.
it's interesting. You look at other movements, like the Celtic movement is more like nature based. You know, seeing God in nature. You think about the high church, like I don't know. I don't have as much experience Episcopalian, Roman Catholic. Maybe it's the grandeur of God, the majesty of God, the unapproachability of God. You think about contemporary worship, and it's the intimacy of God and God's fathership. And every movement has its own like thing, and you really have to like watch that you are more well versed than just that one thing.
Hmm.
So when I got into the Presbyterian Church, that was the first time I encountered these great reformational hymns, you know, talking about God as a mighty fortress, you know, and yeah, I mean, it really opened up a whole new aspect of what God was like. At the same time, contemporary music was breaking onto the scene for the first time, and I heard music that sounded like what I like to listen to on the radio, and music that I could sing along with more easily, and music that I could memorize more easily, and music that like took root in my heart, and music that was with me when times were hard. That music was just there, and that's when I developed a real passion for, oh, you can minister through music too. And my voice wasn't the best because, like I said, I never sang growing up. And it's still not the best, frankly. But
I love it.
the great thing about being a worship leader is you don't want to sing like a superstar. You don't want to have a 4 octave range because you're there to lead other people. And so my curse is also my blessing. I have to sing simply because that's that's what I got to work with. And I think when people are led simply, it enables them to not focus on the leader, but to focus on God. And anyway, long story short, I've just come to love music. I took piano lessons growing up. I took guitar lessons in grad school. I've really got into electronic music lately, and I don't mean like EDM, like boosh, boosh. I mean like
I'm
synth
in your
design.
car. Don't lie.
Yeah,
Lie. You were
yeah.
into EDM a little bit as well.
I'm into a lot of. I don't discriminate. I like all styles of music. I
Yeah,
barely have met one I don't like, and I kind of bashed banjo earlier, but I appreciate bluegrass music now. I appreciate all kinds of music. Um, and anyway, right now I'm into synth design, sound design, you know, oscillators and subtractive synthesis and additive synthesis and effects, and I could go on and on. The next track I'm working on with our worship band is going to feature some of that, hopefully.
cool.
Um, but anyway, yeah, music as an avenue to know God better is a parallel path in my story that developed along the same time as I developed my passion for Reformed theology. So it's been kind of neat to see that bloom.
Uh, I always I always think of that idea of music in the same way that I think about closing your eyes when you pray. I don't know if that
Yeah,
makes any sense, but the way that you can be lost into the rhythm and into just the melody of music and just be lost into it. For me, I think is so powerful because it helps you focus on who God is. And then as a science teacher, the wavelengths and how all those waves go together to make harmonies. I'm like,
yeah.
man, it's like there's something about music that just is so important to worship and to just life. Do you feel that way?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I was just reading last night about different temperaments. I don't know if you've heard of that, but the scale we use is an equal temperament in the West, but there are a lot of other cultures that divide the notes between the octaves slightly differently. And there's this whole new palette emerging where you're not stuck to 12 notes, but you have more international influence.
Hmm.
There's alternate tunings where A is not 440 hertz, but 432 or other things. And I mean, gosh, you could dive deep into the physics of sound and never emerge. And unfortunately, contemporary worship music is usually like G, C, D, E minor, repeat. Um, but the cool thing is, and here's another thing I'm really passionate about is contemporary music really is deep, and it gets a bad rap, and I want to be part of making it have a better rap by doing it well.
Hmm.
And
Love that.
yeah, so I mean, if you have a classical piano piece, wow, sounded that very West Virginia like piano, a piano piece. You know, you've got all these different levels of dynamics, and you've got the sustain pedal, and you've got density of notes and stuff. But within a synth like I'm using now, you've got reverbs and echoes that you can add. You've got brightness. You've got layering of different sounds. You can make that song build, and I do on a typical Sunday with one instrument through numerous different ways. Now combine that with the other instruments. When do you bring the bass guitar in? What pattern are they playing? How do the drums build? When do they add more cymbals? When is it just a kick drum? With the electric guitar, the electric guitar itself is like a pipe organ with all the different levels that it can build, from ambient and ethereal, all the way through driving, and passionate. And so worship music gets this bad rap about, oh, it's just the same 5 words 17 times and it sounds exactly the same. Well, no, it doesn't have to be. In fact, some of the worship music that's out now is way more dense with what it says than some hymns are from a certain period.
Hmm.
So to just make this black and white of, this style is good, this style is bad. No, worship music, modern worship music, can be really, really deep content wise and it can be really, really intricate with its instrumentation, even if the foundation is G, C, D, and E minor. you know, um,
That's I
a lot
love
of hymn.
I love that you just said that because there's this constant debate about well, it should only be hymns or it should only be Gregorian chant. Let's all just
Yeah.
everybody has in their time frame
Mm,
what
mm,
they think is supposed to be right. And what I love about what you're saying is that basically the music that you create is an art of worship, right? You're painting a picture with all these different sounds, and the appreciation of understanding that, the appreciation of that music is really all those different things is appreciation of God, which is the point to further our relationship and trust and surrender. And so
yeah.
you're painting that picture with music, and I don't think people give the credit that's due. So I just really appreciate that.
Well, I like to think that, you know, there's a lot about Christianity that is meant to be contemporized. Um, the language we preach in is something we could all agree should be contemporary. I hope
Sure.
you go to a church, they're talking in Latin, and you're not a Latin speaker. What good does that do you? It's like Paul said, I'd rather you speak one word I can understand.
Yeah,
Um, but so we can agree on that, and I would go further and say, hey, the translation of the Bible we use should be easily understood too.
that's
But we
what.
can go further than that. Yeah. So I think we can go further than that and say even the style of presentation should be, why press pause 5 years, 10 years, 60 years, 100 years? Why press pause on any era? Christianity's and the church has existed since Adam and Eve, and God has been worshipped by people since the very beginning. And the culture of that worship has constantly been changing. You alluded to Gregorian chants. There was a time when the pipe organ was a new invention. It was controversial.
Yeah,
Um,
the devil's instrument.
yeah. So every wave of change that's come, people have always been like, "Oh, but this doesn't feel right. I grew up with it this way," and I think you have to be real careful, or else a style becomes more important. It becomes an idol.
I
You
was
know.
hoping you were going to say the word. I thought you were going to steer off, but you came back.
Yeah.
And I don't
Bringing it.
like it.
And the thing is that nobody is immune to that. Like, I grew up, and the most formative things that happened in my Christian life happened to the soundtrack of How Great Is Our God and Blessed Be Your Name, the Matt Redman era and the early days of Chris Tomlin. And so when people just ask me to sing a song, that's the first thing that comes out. Is like, hey, let's do How Great Is Our God. Now, I realize that there are people born, probably to use an example, like, I haven't done the math, but I imagine Marissa, Rachel Vanderplug, probably weren't even alive when that song was written.
Tell me, those are Scott's kids. For those of you that
Yes.
don't go to Sunlight, like 15, she's 15 and 12, right?
Something like that. And I'm like, man, there's a whole, like, high schoolers nowadays, that's like ancient history to them. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But that to me seems like the most like default style of Christian music. So I have to fight, like, to stay. I don't want to just read onto everybody else like, well, this feels right to me, so this is going to be our style. You know what I'm saying? So, and specifically, I try to fight toward a more contemporary style because, again, why not? Why should the church today sound like we exist in the 1600s or the 400s or the 1800s or the 1950s? Why not sound like a church that exists alongside culture today? And
Well,
when people come in off the street after listening to the radio, it just makes sense. Like, oh, this is music. We can worship God through music. I get it.
your story plays into that, is what I was going to
Yeah.
say. Because for you, that was one of the things that cemented you into the new church, is not only their love for the gospel, but hey, and theology. But hey, this sounds like things that I like to listen. I didn't know I could worship like that, and
Yeah.
so I think that it's important that as it evolves, like what you're saying, that as the worship music evolves, it mirrors culture, because those are the people that are going to come if they're the customer of the church, is God and
Yeah.
and the people walking on the street that don't have a relationship, well, then we're serving them, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's absolutely critical. It's the paint we use. It's on the palette. It's what we use to paint the message. The message never changes, but the the way we present it has to evolve. I mean, we're using air conditioning, we're using light bulbs, we're using microphones. Things change in technology, and things change in language, and things change in culture. And to press pause at any point along the way because it just feels right to you, I don't think serves the mission very well. It's selfish. That's a pretty strong way of saying it, but it is. It's like, hey, my comfort is more important than the mission, and people aren't willing to admit that sometimes. Um, so yeah, that's difficult, and I'm really just fortunate and glad that Sunlight. I think for the most part, in general, in the whole world, though the worship wars are behind us, you know, the battle has been fought about whether you can have drums in a church or not, and the drums won. And thank God that battle's behind us. And Scott actually fought that battle before I came, thank God as well. So the worship wars, quote unquote, are largely behind us, but there's still this tension of like, how contemporary do we need to be? And that's something I wrestle with in my job.
Well, you wrestle with it. You wrestle
Yeah,
with it though because you love people, right?
yeah,
And the
yeah,
reason, I mean, you don't. I mean, we're not taking a vote before we have worship. I mean, it's not like that, but it's your love of people to try to serve them. Because if "How Great Is Our God" is a song that just touches you, well, then you want to serve people in that, so that everyone can connect to God. So it is a
yeah.
struggle. Hey,
Yeah, and above all, just doing like making sure worship is theologically honoring to God and is accessible. People can actually sing. There's some common sense guidelines that, and Scott's all big about participation. So we got to do this in a way people can participate in. And so anyway, yeah, that's worship in a nutshell. It's one of the most difficult jobs because it's so subjective. I'm a performance oriented guy. I like getting the A's. But when you perform an art, there's always going to be people that don't like it. Not because it wasn't good, but because it's not their thing. And that's very difficult for me. Um, but it's what God has called me to, and so I soldier on.
well, I think even what you said there, and I know you've said this to me before, and you said this to the team, the worship team, is that really you're performing for an audience of one. I think is the term that you use. That we want to be excellent because we're worshiping God, and that is the point of our worship. And so I think
Yeah.
for me, that really says a lot about who you are, and I really appreciate that. I know we're over time a little bit here, and so I just want to come to this idea. I know you've brought up a lot of things about ministry that I think are probably really eye-opening to some people. But if you could sum it all up, just to give this show like fluidity, talk about why God is awesome throughout your testimony, going from kid in West Virginia, single child, to valedictorian, to news anchor we didn't even talk about, to music aficionado, then moving all the way up to down to Florida and being in ministry, going through seminary. Man, it's like a ton of stuff. Through all
Yeah.
of that, if you could synthesize why God is awesome.
Yeah. And for my answer to make sense, people do have to know there's even more strands to the thread we didn't talk about. Like you said, I majored in journalism in college, of all things. I learned how to shoot video. I learned how to edit video. I learned how to write in a way that makes sense when it's spoken out loud. I majored in psychology as well, master's degree in counseling. And it's like when you put all of that together with all the stuff we've already talked about, it's like some could look at that tapestry of a life and say, wow, that's a mess. But I think God's awesome because he takes all the pieces of the tapestry that is your life, all the strands that didn't make sense at the time. Why did I study journalism in school? Well, so I could learn how to make a good video and how I could learn to edit video. Why did I, learn how to write so it could be spoken, and that's so I could preach. Why did I study counseling? Well, that's so I can help other people. And why, just bring all those strands together. And God is awesome because he doesn't waste anything. There's not an element in your life that is just happenstance or chance. God is behind it all, and it's all headed somewhere great.
Oh, I love it. Beautiful. The strands idea should be on a t-shirt. That's our t-shirt moment.
Yeah.
I love that idea that God
You
weaves
want to
lives.
give people bonus content right at the end?
Sure.
Because we didn't talk about my coffee habit either. So
Oh,
here's your post interview.
stoppage time.
People
We're going
have
to talk
to.
about his coffee addiction. It's not addiction, just
Yes,
appreciation.
it's just a love. It's just a love of coffee. Here we have. Will the camera not switch?
Oh.
Keurig. Pour over. We have the mocha pot and espresso. So yeah. Oh, and can't forget the coffee mug collection. So.
I noticed the NPR nerd cup you're drinking as well.
Yeah, I was using my NASA mug yesterday, hoping to see a space launch, but of course it got scrubbed. But yeah, all my interests are in mug form as well, and in mousepad form.
DJ Pepperoni.
Cats, pizzas, and DJing, 3 of my interests all in one mousepad. How can you not buy that?
I mean, if that doesn't sum everything up, I don't know what does.
It's a fitting summary, yes.
I mean, yeah, this is something that if you were writing it out to be spoken, we would have put in the middle in the end, but I'm glad that it made it onto the show.
That's right.
It says who you are, and who you are is awesome. So thankful for the way that God has used you to be a part of his awesome story, Bill. Thanks for being on the show. And I'm just so thankful for your friendship and your ministry. And just ask that if you have any questions out there for Bill, he's very approachable. So shoot him a message and ask. You can find him on Facebook. If you want to be part of this show, write in the comments section. You can click the link like Bill did and sign up to be on the show. I want you to be here. I want to learn about your life. I want to know how God is using you, and so does everyone else. So make sure to click that. Thanks again, Bill. And remember, between it now and next time, that God is awesome. All right, we'll see you next time.